Let me ask you this. Why has the US men's national team never had a world-class player? Now, the term world-class can be subjective in certain cases, but if we go by the general consensus of the world soccer community, incredible players like Tim Howard, Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan were not world-class. Neither is Christian Pulisic. I have seen USMNT fans say that Pulisic, for example, is world-class. But you know, the world-class tier belongs to players like Mo Salah, Lamine Yamal, Vinicius, Rafinha, Kylian Mbappe. And as good as Christian Pulisic is, would you really put him at the same level or very close to any of those players? I don't think so. So what's the issue? MLS? USL? Our soccer culture? Lack of pro rel? Definitely not the lack of money. What's wrong? Today we're going to be discussing all of that with Herc Gomez. Hello. If you're new here, I'm Filippo and welcome to Tactical Manager TV. And today we have part 2 of our 2-part interview with Herc Gomez. And again, it's a bit of an interview and a bit of a discussion. For part 1 that we released a few days ago, we talked about Pochettino, the current US men's national team, this summer, the roster, and much more. Now for part 2, we're going to be addressing why has the US men's national team never had a world-class player. It's a long discussion, despite being just one question. So sit back, relax, let us know your thoughts on this topic. What are the reasons we've never had a world-class player? Many of you probably think it's just our soccer culture, but I think there's much more to it. Now, make sure to drop a like because I will not be requesting during the video. And likes and comments are what help us reach a much larger audience. With that said, let's roll the intro and let's bring in Herc Gomez. Okay, Herc, part 2 of this little interview that we're having prior to the USMNT summer that was looking very promising, then it's not looking promising, and hopefully it ends up in a positive note for whatever that's worth at this point. But I have a question for you, which has really nothing to do with the current, well, kind of does with the current generation, but it's something that we often talk about with US soccer. I think before I even start this question, I need to ask you just a yes or no question. Has the US men's national team ever had a world-class player, in your opinion? Because if you say yes, then we're going to have to change the dynamic of this episode. If you say no, then I'm going to go a different direction, which is the one I'm expecting.
Um, they've had glimpses of a world-class player, and it just so happens that right now he's not very well liked. But like Christian Pulisic for the last 2 seasons, when healthy, has shown you that he has world-class ability. And for 2 seasons, when he's physically fit, you look at the numbers, and people can say what they want about Serie A, but those numbers are ridiculous. Like goal contributions over the last 2 seasons, you're talking about the highest, the top 3, Lautaro Martinez, Lookman for Atalanta, and Christian Pulisic. He's been that good. I think there are very few teams that Christian Pulisic wouldn't be sought after for. Now that he starts for, we can start closing some of those doors, right? But at 26 years old, I think he's the closest the U.S. men's national team has ever come to a world-class player. And I'll leave it at glimpses because I think there's a difference between world-class. It's players that you see that can easily walk onto a team. You know, like every team in the world would take Christian Pulisic. Now, would he start for every team in the world? That's very different. Those are the cracks. Like those are your just Mbappe's, Erling Haaland's, Lamine Yamal's. Like right now, like would walk into every single team and probably be 1A on that, you know, roster, if you will. Those are the different type of players. But when it comes to world class, like if I'm thinking about who could realistically say I could play on that team, like they would take me, they would be interested in me, I think it's Christian Pulisic.
I agree that he's definitely the closest we've ever had. And yeah, glimpses he's shown ever since, even with Chelsea, right? We saw that before the injury. We've seen
Yeah, but he didn't
glimpses
have
of,
those numbers.
I think he didn't get the opportunity to have it, right? Because he tore his like lockdown. Pulisic would pull those numbers if he stayed healthy for a full season, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
I think when we talk about lockdown Pulisic, there's so many factors, and when we talk about him getting on the field, that's part of the factors of being a world class player. Is
agree.
you know, it is proving your worth day in and day out, and being somebody that they can't just take you out of the lineup, which I think has been the case for Christian Pulisic when healthy at Milan. And also, lockdown Pulisic didn't play in front of fans. Like I, I have this
Isn't
thought
that
all the
worse?
time.
Isn't that worse?
No, no. So no, think about. I can't tell you how many times I've played with players who, in the training session, you're like, damn, this kid is Cristiano. This kid is ridiculous. This kid is nasty. You put him under the lights in front of the fans, those legs go to gum. They're gum. Like they're weak. They're not strong. He's losing the ball. He's in his head. He can't deal with the pressure. And that's it. This kid's out of the league in a year. But during training sessions, like, God damn, this kid's amazing. It's very different when the lights are on. It's very
I
different
agree.
when,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that's part of being a world class player. It's very different, or just a professional. It's very different when you can hear opposing fans yelling at you. It's very different if you can hear your fans demanding things of you. That's part of it too.
It's to me, it's this like glimpses of world class talent and moments we've seen even with players like Dimitri Payet. Remember him
Of
from West Ham?
course,
Like
yeah.
there were moments
Where
where
is
you
he
look at
now? He's in
he's
Brazil.
in Vasco and there's a very nasty like
Yeah,
locker.
we don't gotta get into
We don't
it.
want to get into that.
No,
Like
no, no.
it's that
Very,
even a
very R.
little
Kelly
weird.
like.
Yeah, go look it up yourself, guys. We're not talking about Dimitri Payet's case in Rio de Janeiro there. They got a little too freaky. But like he's shown when he played in the Premier League or even in France, like you look at it, it's like, holy crap, like it's such a talented player. And there are many others that we can talk about. Like even if we go back a few seasons, you're gonna remember this one, even though I don't even know what's going on with him now. Like Ansu Fati, when he came up, you're like, oh my God, there's like glimpses of world class right there. And then injuries and other things like led to him being a little bit forgotten right now. But in terms of that, I'm not like Christian Pulisic to me is if you talk to some American USMNT fans, there are some that will say that he is world class. But if you go to the general consensus of the soccer world and you talk to everyone, most agree that Pulisic's a very good player, but no one's ready to put him in the same tier as some of the names you put out there. Kylian Mbappe, Lamine Yamal, Mo Salah, Vinicius,
No,
Rafinha. He
but
can't be in that world class
let
tier.
me ask you a question. If you're in the 11 of a team like Man City, you think you're world class?
Not necessarily, but very likely, but not
Okay.
necessarily.
To Johnny Reinders, who's the only player I think comparable to Christian
Mhm.
Pulisic, and it's like if you talk about the two most consistent players from Milan, I would say Christian Pulisic 1A to Johnny Reinders 1B, and he's
Mhm.
had a hell of a season. He's right now on the radar of Manchester City. So
Mhm.
like I I think people forget how massive a club Milan is in brand recognition and how difficult of a league Serie A can be. I think they downplay Serie A. I don't think it's an easy place to play Milan. All eyes are on you. I think that has hardened Christian Pulisic. I think that's made him a better footballer. Um, but numbers are numbers, man. And I was a forward, and they could say what they want about you, and they could say we're not paying you that. They could say we're not ready to offer you this. But at the end of the day, you just pull up the numbers. Well, the numbers indicate I should be around here, right? This is where I should be. I think Christian Pulisic's numbers indicate that that's where he should be. Now, we could have an argument over if he'd start on the majority of these teams, but you saw Real Madrid this year. Do you think Real Madrid wouldn't have taken Christian Pulisic on their bench?
Bench, yes.
Of course. And I think that goes the same for City, same for Liverpool, same for United. And then from there, it's a question of, well, how do you react to being on the bench? How do you react to trying to work your way into the 11? Can you be a mainstay? But I think the definition of world class is what has people hung up here. World class to me isn't a Lamine Yamal, isn't an Erling Haaland, a Kylian Mbappe, isn't a Jude Bellingham. Like those are players that are above their peers. Those are Ballon d'Or candidates. Um, that's not world class, you know, to me at least. I think when you go into those all 11s, that's a different type of crack. That's an astro to me. I think there are levels to this.
I know performing for Milan is very difficult, especially because how big that club is, and even though they're not great, the demand is to win the Serie A, right? Even though they're not great, the fan and media are going to demand that from Milan, even if they're not good enough. It's even a bit delusional at times.
Sure.
But there is a difference between playing also for a club like Milan right now, where even though that's the demand, it's not overly realistic because of their circumstance. You look at other teams in Italy, especially Inter, they are ahead. Even though Milan was able to beat them, it's a derby.
Inter, Napoli, depending on the
Juve
season,
even.
Atalanta and Juve. Yeah, but you could say that. But I guarantee you, those players on those teams probably don't have the pressure the Milan players have. You know,
Inter probably.
Corda, yeah, but Corda Sur, like those fans, those ultras. Have you ever seen the video of those fans berating Zlatan, berating the Milan players? Like, it's a different type of pressure, man. And I know what you're saying about it being delusional, but that's the expectation. There are certain expectations for teams around the world that you have to be there, and I think that's hardened Pulisic's mentality at the club level. I don't think the expectations there at the national team level.
Okay, so with this said, with the whole thing about Pulisic, regardless of where someone stands, let's even if Pulisic is a world class player, even if he is, that is one player that we were able to name. And some people are going to say Tim Howard had his moments, but I don't put him in that category as a goalkeeper.
No,
I say he's an elite goalkeeper,
sure.
and definitely played at a extremely high level. It was incredible. But when we talk about world class goalkeepers, we talk about Courtois, we're talking about Neuer, we're talking about Allison, like these goalkeepers that can win a Champions League for you. And I don't think Howard was at that. Well, I think most people agree with that. So regardless of that, even if Pulisic is, that's one player for a country this size with all the resources America has, the United States, even MLS. I talk to players and they even talk about how they play in Brazil, Argentina, even in Europe, and they talk about the infrastructure in MLS. Like this is like the top of the top for the most part. Um,
Well, yeah, for
yeah,
facilities, for resources, like
yes.
you, but what goes into those resources? It's not just the building, it's not just the field, it's not just like, you got the gear. Like,
So let me ask you that. That's a great point. And that's where I wanted to go with it. Why hasn't the United States, or not the United States, the U.S. men's national team, because the women's national team definitely had their fair share of world class players. Why don't we have it? Is it culture? Is it coaching? Is it MLS and USL's fault? Is it US Soccer's fault? Is it everyone's fault? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
okay, I go back to coaching. Um, Methodology, right? You look at the US, you don't have great coaches. So you could have all the resources, all the material in the world that you need. If you don't have the methodology to mold these players, you're not going to have a player like Lamine Yamal, who at 16 years old or 15 years old is debuting at Barca. At 16 years old is playing his first Euros. At 17-year-old is probably a front runner for the Ballon d'Or. You're not going to have that because here at 15 years old, you're maybe getting approached to go to Europe. At 16 years old, you finally can be in Europe, right? That's when you can legally be there and you can get a chance. At 16, 17, maybe you're stepping onto the first team like Christian Pulisic, and that's the most accelerated of of causes or of examples I can go with here. You don't have that. So it goes back to coaching. That's why you don't have or never had a world class player, or probably are going to lack for world class players because you don't develop them. And it's not just cultural. A lot of that is because your family's from Brazil, my family's from Mexico. Chances are you probably got a picture of you as a baby holding a soccer ball, right?
Mhm.
I got that one. Chances are you probably have a picture of the soccer ball with all the flags on it. I have that one. Chances are, as soon as you were able to, stand up before you were walking, your dad or somebody was holding your foot and making contact with the ball. That's not per se what happens here. So if it's not cultural and you don't have the methodology, you're behind in that resource, which is the greatest resource of all. Gives a shit what the stadium looks like or what the grass is like, or what kind of gear you have, or what kind of sensors they put around your chest that measures how much you run or the distance traveled.
What
Like,
about the crazy app? That app's not going to solve all the issues. That great
ex-
app.
exactly. But that's what I'm saying, man. Like you don't have that. So if you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to be put with the rest of the world. I'm going to give you an example. You mentioned the women. Uh, hey, women had a disastrous World Cup for their standards.
Hmm.
They got out of the group, were immediately eliminated, albeit in penalty kicks, with Vol- um with um, with their coach um,
Vlaco.
Vlaco Andonovski. Thank you. I was going to say Volkanovski. I'm thinking UFC.
No, no, definitely
They
not.
had a disastrous World Cup. The team had regressed. You saw a clear lack of identity and really lack of idea in the final third. And we started asking questions like, has the rest of the world caught up? So you say world class, right?
Hmm.
Well, I go back to U.S. coaching. Okay, you can have these facilities, and for the longest time they had a leg up. But has the U.S. had a player like Atiana, Bonmati? Like, have they had a player like that? Like that's a world class player, technical ability. The U.S. has a very good team that's dominant because they've got some just horses, in that final third. They've got players that can change a game. Sophia Smith, Trinity Rodman, Mallory Swanson. They've got some players that are special in the final third. They've got discipline in the back. They've
They
now
have
have
Ballon
an
d'Or winners, though.
they have a yeah, but the rest of the world is catching up because of those resources. Before the US, the women, like they had a leg up because NCAA here, high school here. Those were the academies here, right? Club soccer. The women in the rest of the world didn't have that. And then they piggybacked off the men's resources that weren't just the stadiums, that weren't just the facilities, but were the methodology. You started seeing better coaches on the women's side on that side. And that's what I think they've caught up the most. And this is why when the US saw the rest of the world catching up, where do they go? Where do they go? Where's Emma Watson from?
England.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Probably
it's
not the best place to go about this, but yeah, that's where we
no,
went.
but for at least for the women's game where she was top of the top,
Yeah, yeah.
and they did what they needed to do. Right? They got a qualified coach before them, qualified coaches. Like they understand that that's still something lacking in this country. So. I think that's the greatest thing that's missing to develop world class players is the methodology, is the coaching.
It's interesting because it's actually two things that you said. Because if you don't have the culture, even with the best coach, it's going to be very difficult to because like players that come out like not even going to go Messi because that's just a freak, right? Like nothing, no one can develop that. That's just born with it, developed somehow. But even talking about like you mentioned, Lautaro Martinez, right, a top player, a lot of it is not just it's not coaching. It's just like cultural from where he grew up and where he played on the streets or just pickup and just watching soccer every day, living, breathing it. We don't really have that in the US, which is fine because it's not really part of our culture or at least the mainstream American culture. There are obviously kids in the US that live and breathe soccer, but it's not generalized. But for example, Brazil, we talked about it. Argentina has great coaches. Brazil is known for having really bad coaches these days.
Yeah,
And it
terrible.
is true. It is factual. Brazilian.
All the top coaches in Brazil are Portuguese or Argentine. So
Yeah, I made a whole video on the other channel about this where you looked at like the last four Brazilian league trophies, like three or four were like Portuguese coach. The Libertadores was like half of them too. They keep winning it. And it's always Portugal or Argentina. And Brazil still develops all these like world class players that they still do. It you can get into discussion that it has fallen off. It might have, like, obviously, you can't develop a Ronaldinho every other time, but Brazil's still having players playing for Real Madrid and fighting for Ballon d'Or titles in Barcelona. That is still happening.
still selling kids at like 40, 50 million. So
Yeah,
so
Endrick Estevão now, so that's still happening without good coaches. Now, when I visited Palmeiras last year, there was one thing that's interesting is different from the American coaches. Brazilian coaches are more the ones that they just kind of sit back and think the talent will solve it for them because that's how
correct.
Brazil used to be. And for youth development, that actually kind of works because you kind of let the players develop. Well, in the US, we want to micromanage everything. And if you don't know what you're doing and you micromanage everything, you make it worse. So, Palmeiras, when I was there, one day of the week, the coaches are not allowed in the facility for the youth teams. They just play. They're not allowed. So it's a different approach. And even though the coaching there is terrible at a professional level, it seems like being a little bit hands off at the youth level is better if you have the culture that the kids will, like you said, will be playing at ages 3, 4, 5, 6 on their own. with their
Yeah,
parents.
yeah. I think that's the key factor here is the culture. You can ask all these ex U.S. men's national team players, and I'm one of them, of why U.S. has never had a world class player, and they all have their own theories. But the reality is, we're nowhere clear, or we're nowhere, excuse me, near a footballing country, and we still have a massive deficit in terms of catching up um, to produce. Uh, a world class player. And it's not just like, I'm not talking about a Messi. I'm not talking about a Diego Armando Maradona or Cristiano Ronaldo, like these generational players. I'm talking about where you have so many players operating at at that world class level that you can say, well, if one doesn't pan out, we keep going. The U.S. is still hoping that they have one. Listen, the U.S. has come a long way. You've had some people on this channel that have over 100 caps, and you're like, whoa, that's very impressive. I mean, people don't realize 50 to 80 of those caps were, in 2 years. Why they did like a residency type program back in the 90s. So it's disingenuous to like tell people like this is what it's like, and it's every generation for the U.S. men's national team has been different, and every time it gets more difficult to produce those top talents because the rest of the world is also now with the same resources. Brazil has struggled over the last 20 years. Italy has struggled over the last 20 years. You know, England is now in a resurgence, but before that was struggling. You can go down the list. There's no set formula for a national team to be successful, but there is, per se, a set formula for producing top tier talent, and it's very easy. It's resources, good coaching, and culture. That's it. Until you have that,
We
and then
only
those
have resources.
yeah, but until you have that, come together, it's going to be very difficult. Can it happen? Sure. But look at the routes Christian Pulisic had to take to even come close to it. You know, uh, at age, what, 14, 15, he was being identified. He was traveling around trying to, latch on to Manchester United, latch on here, latch on there. Finally went to Borussia Dortmund. It worked out in his favor. Uh, Dude, on my podcast a week ago, I have a player, or an ex-player. He's now an agent, um, and you guys can check it out. Who talks
Vamos,
about,
you mean
yes,
Vamos? Yes.
vamos, who talks about how he tried out at Barcelona. He tried out at United. He was here. He was there, and like what that culture, shock was like, and then how he ended up playing at Schalke, and he was, with Weston, and he would hang out, being a Bundesliga player, trying to make it with Christian Pulisic, and it's like until you have hundreds of those stories of players in those positions, and some of those don't pan out, but maybe some do. Until you have, it's a numbers game. Until you have that. Uh, we're going to still be here doing the same thing.
Yeah, and it's actually fascinating that the U.S. never had this, and I've spoken about this in the past, where outside of the U.S. making an incredible run in the World Cup, because that would help soccer grow in popularity among other sports
This
fans.
World Cup would be a good indicator of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I did also say that what the US is really missing for, kids and just sports fan in America to actually embrace the national team is that one superstar player that would just be killing it even if the team's not that great, but he's killing it in the Champions League, or just like a player that people can look up to and say, we have one of the best
Of
right there,
course,
scoring goals.
of
And
course.
Pulisic is the closest to that, but he doesn't feel like that superstar that you really need for Americans to embrace.
Yeah, he also doesn't want it, and it's history
That's
repeating
another
itself.
problem.
By
Yeah.
the way, Nick Taitagi is the guy I'm talking about. He's a ex player turned agent now. He retired because of like
Health
career ending
condition, right?
injuries. Yeah, health.
Yeah.
But the story is fascinating. You guys should check it out. But he goes through like what he sees now, and when identifying those world class players, or one day could be what they look for, what he looks for, what the agency looks for, what top agents around the world look for. I think it's a good snapshot into it.
I'm gonna put the link to that podcast in the description. So anyone that wants to check it out, just go in the description, click on it.
Yeah. So going back to what you're saying, I think it's history repeating itself. I mean, Landon Donovan and Christian Pulisic are not very different. I played club soccer with Landon. We won championships together with the LA Galaxy. I played national team with Landon. We're on the World Cup team together in 2010. I know him very well. From what I could see of Christian Pulisic, there are a lot of parallels to Landon Donovan. And I'm not talking about on the field, even though there are some similarities on the field. Decision making. I think they're both very good at decision making. Like Landon's greatest attribute was he just always did what he was supposed to do. If he was supposed to shoot, he shot. If he was supposed to, lay a ball off, if he was supposed to, pass here, whatever he was supposed to do, dribble, he did when the moment called upon. I think Christian Pulisic is very good at that decision making as well, and they're very similar in movements and styles. Though I think Pulisic's got a lot more in his cup. That said, off the field, man, these kids are similar. Like even the way they talk through their teeth, not really looking at you, not really looking at the camera. I don't want the attention.
And you've interviewed Pulisic, so you've seen this up close.
I've interviewed Christian Pulisic a few times,
Mhm.
and Christian Pulisic is very introverted. He's not a guy that puts himself out there, and that's fine. That's him. I've got no issue with that. But I agree with you. I think the U.S. is starving for that superstar, that guy who wants to be out there. And look at the women. The women,
Even a bit arrogant, right? Even with a little bit of arrogance
yeah,
that make
that's
up.
fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Listen, Lamine Yamal's a bit arrogant, right?
You have to
He's,
be you end up
but
having to
he's
be
he's
or
a,
be
he's
that
an
way.
absolute star, absolute star. And sometimes he says things that are controversial, and you can account to because he's young, right? But he gives you something to talk about. He's in anytime he plays, you're like that style. He backs up with that personality. The U.S. like they could take a page out of the women's book. The women, man, just overflowing personality. Like everything you see, they give you a snapshot into their life. They're very marketable. They're very relatable. They're very just approachable, I think is the word. The men, Weston, who else would you say is approachable?
Dest is pretty
Serginho.
Dest.
But I mean, you're really grasping at straws here, you know? So I agree with you.
Yeah, it's I mean, I don't want to say it this way, but it almost feels like there's a lack of like strong, well, they have strong personalities, but it's just not really charisma, maybe lack of charisma.
Sure. And
Of
a lot
the,
of that could be the program today. But going back to that superstar, I do think the U.S. is yearning for that superstar. I
a
do think,
Zlatan, for example, something like that.
yeah,
Americans would just love to follow along. There's entertainment, and I think that can do as much in growing popularity of the national team as a deep World Cup run, which we haven't seen yet, like a semifinals. But and then that goes to just to wrap up this episode. That's where it can influence culture of like a 4-year-old or a dad that sees and influences his sons. Like
well,
I want to be like that. I want to be like that. And then you have so many kids doing it that one or two pop out, and then you get what you get.
1994 spawned the birth of a domestic league, right? It was already in the works, but after the success of 94, they're like, yeah, we got to make this happen. Domestic league comes about, Major League Soccer, which has been instrumental in the U.S. men's national team's growth. Nobody could deny that. I think you'd have to be just a complete hater to say that, MLS hasn't been a major factor in the growth
I'm
of
a
the U.S.
big
men's.
hater, but I agree with you on that. But yeah,
2010, I'm sorry, 2002. I am 18 years old. I'm seeing Landon Donovan, DeMarcus Beasley on my TV screen play in South Korea and Japan in a World Cup. And I'm like, shit, that's where I want to be. That's exactly where I want to be. These kids are my age. This kid is from LA. I want to be there. That's where I want to be. 2010, Landon Donovan scores a goal against Algeria, last minute winner. Okay. I was there. Matt Turner sees that and decides he wants to take soccer seriously and he wants to be in a World Cup. Ends up in the World Cup in 2022 in Qatar in the goal for the U.S. men's national team and plays very, very well. There are, in the history of the game, especially in this country, pivotal moments where a player or two identifies that's the moment. A deep World Cup run on home soil with what the World Cup means to the world can absolutely be a game changer in this country. That goes for Canada. That goes for Mexico as well. But an absolute game changer, and one that the U.S. men's national team can ill afford. Now, Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, all these guys who are looking for their payday in Major League Soccer, because they will all look for that payday in Major League Soccer. Raul Jimenez, who strategically structured his extension at Fulham, so he's a free agent during the World Cup. This will be the biggest platform those players have. And I can think of no better send-off for them in European football than a deep run at the World Cup and then right off into the sunset in their own home country. You can set yourself up nicely for what's to come in life. You owe nobody nothing. These players can make their decisions. But if they really wanted to come back to the United States after that World Cup, what better platform than a home World Cup where you showcase yourself not only to Major League Soccer, not only to your domestic fan base, but the rest of the world. I think this is a pivotal moment for the game and a pivotal moment for those players who, you know, if the reports are true, many of them are looking to come back.
Yep. And then just to wrap things up, it seems like a big portion of why we haven't had a world-class player is cultural, but we can't really let US Soccer, for example, Major League Soccer, USL, use that as an excuse. They are the ones that can influence that the most. Obviously, some things are out of their control, like you talked about moments in the World Cup, but influencing community, getting involved, helping kids get into games, like by not charging maybe too much for a game, like trying to get them involved is how you influence culture and you collect the dividends many, many years in the future. So let's not just go with it, say, oh, we don't have the soccer culture, and say there's nothing US Soccer and MLS can do. They can do. It's just slow. And they haven't done it, in my opinion.
But also no world-class player has ever stayed world-class playing outside of a top 5 league. Okay? They've all earned their world-class status in those top leagues. They all earned those world-class status developing or finishing their development there. So it's vital to understand that development is important in your domestic country, but you got to leave. You got to go. You got to sharpen. You got to sharpen that iron elsewhere, or else you'll never get there.
But you have to go at a level already that you can become world
class. Of
class.
Course, that you can make the adjustment to that jump.
Exactly. You have to have the technical floor and all the development that when you get there, they can sharpen the iron enough so you to become the world-class player. Like, you can't get me now and develop me in the top 5 league. I ain't becoming world-class, Herc. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Not with your knees.
No. No. Herc, thank you very much for coming along. And I guess I'm going to see you very soon in North Carolina in the TST tournament.
Well, I get there around the semis, so maybe we'll see each other.
What are you implying? What are you implying here? That we're not going to make it?
Hey, I'm just saying TST's no joke, man. You can't come in just thinking, oh, I got my Brazilian friends. We're going to do Joga Bonito. It could be a rough qualifying campaign for you, as you know very well.
Hopefully we prove the haters wrong. I'm glad the Tactical Manager Soccer Club has a hater already.
That's well, the crowd, the inner workings of the TST world, they've been labeling you the Bolivian manager. So let's hope you prove them wrong.
Well, we will prove them wrong. And then if we do very well, okay, I have one thing for you before you go.
I struck a chord.
If I win the TST, will you play for my team in 2026?
If you win the TST, yeah, I'll manage your team in 2026.
Perfect. I got you in my roster if we win it. Hey, now it's set. It's recorded. Thank you for watching, everyone. Drop a like before you go. And if you guys go to the TST, we'll see you all there. Bye-bye.